Well, hello. Happy Thursday to you. This is our gentle digital twin week, actually, and I'm sort of gently tiptoeing into that space. You'll excuse the title of this talk. Nobody gives a rat's arse about digital twin. You'll notice I'm using the British version of arse as against the American version, which is ass, which I'm sorry to my American friends is it's not doesn't sound quite as nice as arse, does it? I don't know. I always pull the leg of my wife and again my kids when they say that. But anyway, so why don't people give an arse about digital twin your customers? It's that challenge that we face where we're talking spatial over here and our customers are talking business over there. And it's been difficult for our industry to talk business, in fact, nigh on impossible. So when we speak about digital twin, which is an extended version really of where the spatial world is going, we continue to focus on that term and what it means, not looking at it from what our customers see, which is the business side, solving a problem. So I've had a couple of really interesting conversations in the last couple of days, which has kind of stimulated this thinking today. But, it's really interesting to look from a different lens about the work that you're doing as a spatial company, for example, or a provider of digital twin solutions. It's far less about the technology, and it's far more about the problem. So let's just dive into that. So let's think about value proposition, that term that we often hear. What does it actually mean? Well, it means benefit. What benefit are you bringing to a customer? Let's focus on one particular benefit, which is a common benefit that people talk about if they're focused on the business conversation, and that's time, saving time. So a value proposition can be as simple as we will save you X amount of time. What's an example of that? In our world today, automation is an example of that. Automating processes which were done manually. That's a time saver. So a couple of very business-centric conversations. I've not mentioned digital twin at all. There's also and James Perdue and I chatted about this earlier in the week. There's a compelling circumstance. I think I mentioned that yesterday. This idea of use it or lose it. So, for example, in the broadband world, we're now in the US. We're now funding. The federal government is now funding getting broadband out to rural areas. And I believe that broadband should be seen as a utility like gas and electricity. So that's kind of how the federal government see it. So let's get broadband out to those communities. But those folks that are building out those networks are under time pressure. They have to get these things done in a certain period of time. So that whole notion of value proposition and time is critical to those guys. Yes, they have to get it done, and yes, they have to get it done quicker. So how are they doing that? Well, currently, a lot of time, and this is not just it, I'm just using this as an example, there's a process where if one wants to connect a rural area that's 5 or 6 miles outside of Salt Lake City, let's just pretend, somebody initially has to actually look at the route it's going to take along that particular road, for example, where they're going to lay that fiber, where they're going to put that coax cable. So you have to have that starting point. Quite often that's done by people walking that area. So they could be walking for 5 miles. They could be walking for actually hundreds of miles. That's how that's done today. So a compelling value proposition, which involves time, would be, we can do this quicker for you. And remember, these guys they need the data, and that's not only two-dimensional data, it's three-dimensional data. It's the digital twin world that we're talking about. How do you speed up that process? Well, we've now got processes where we can actually collect data by driving vehicles, and we can collect very high accuracy imagery and LiDAR. That's done quickly. That's a very compelling value proposition. It's automating what is currently a manual process. And the level of pain that solves is high. So it's a very compelling reason to get it done quickly because we might lose the funding. And also for those folks that are having to do all this manual processing, when you automate that process, incredibly compelling. a lot of value attached to it, and there's a lot of funding. Like I said, in that world, this example, there's a lot of funding there. So there's a really good business case we're talking about here in the telecommunications world and broadband world, which fits in all of those criteria that we're talking about. If you leave it to the spatial world, we'll be talking about digital twins until the cows come home. We'll be talking about the processes and the sensors that we use to collect the data. We'll be talking about collecting the data. We'll be talking about maps. So there are these two worlds that are disconnected at the minute. And actually, one of the reasons we set up Spatial Advisors was to connect that, to translate actually what is spatial into business talk and vice versa. So the disconnect between the geospatial world and the spatial world is we are so focused on, in this case, for this talk, digital twin, we're not focused on what problem we're actually solving. We can talk about digital twin once we've isolated those things I've just explained to the value proposition, the compelling circumstance. Once we figure all that stuff out and we're talking to the customers in their language, we can then talk about digital twin. But if we start with digital twin, guess what we'll do? Fail. So Thursday talk, an interesting one I thought, but I think about digital twin and the emergence of digital twin, and I look at the language being used, and I look at the examples that people provide, and it's cool, but it doesn't get to the business problem. And that's the missing piece at the minute that our industry has really got to get past. So again, I encourage you to follow me if you're on LinkedIn, because I do a lot of these talks. And again, in YouTube, feel free to subscribe. I love your comments. People reach back to me all the time, so I really love it. Disagree, agree, and I'll do another talk maybe tomorrow, more likely Monday. Thanks for watching.